It's a Saturday evening in Melbourne, the 20th of October 1978. Steve Roby is at his console at the Melbourne Flight Service unit, working the radio. It's a quiet shift. The sun went down about half an hour ago. There is light weekend traffic, a few private pilots calling in position reports, a couple of charter flights, nothing unusual. The kind of Saturday evening that leaves you with time to think. At 7 o'clock, a young pilot checks in from Cape Otway, right on schedule, 41 minutes out of Moorabbin, exactly as his flight plan said he would be. Delta Sierra Juliet, the controller notes. A Cessna 182 southbound to King Island. Everything looks fine. Steve Roby makes a note in his log and returns to the hum of the console. 6 minutes pass, and then the radio crackles.
Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000?
Roby checks. There is nothing on the system. He tells the pilot so.
Melbourne, seems to be a large craft below 5,000.
Roby asks what type of craft. The pilot pauses. His voice is measured, calm, almost puzzled. The way a man sounds when he's describing something his eyes are telling him and his brain hasn't quite caught up with yet.
I cannot affirm. It's full bright. It seems to me like landing lights.
In the years that followed, Steve Roby would be asked many times what he thought in that moment. He would say he thought it was probably nothing, a misidentified aircraft, a planet sitting low on the horizon. These things happen with inexperienced pilots, especially at night. He kept the channel open. He kept listening. And what he heard over the next 6 minutes would stay with him for the rest of his life. Welcome to Struth, a podcast exploring the mysteries of Australia. The famous ones and the ones that deserve to be. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and over 2 episodes we're going to follow Frederick Valentich as closely as the evidence allows. Into his life, onto that flight, into those 6 minutes of radio transmission, and into the silence that followed. We'll look at every theory, weigh every piece of evidence, and be honest about what remains. After nearly 5 decades, genuinely unanswered. I'd also like to add that this episode was a special request from Peter Eisenhart. Thanks, Peter. I appreciate your support for the show. And thank you all for leaving a comment, hitting like, subscribe, whatever works on your podcasting platform. It really makes a difference, so thanks again. This is part 1, the flight. Avondale Heights is a suburb in Melbourne's west, the kind of place that grew quickly in the post-war years as European migrants built new lives in a new country. The houses are modest and solid. The streets are quiet. In the 1960s and 70s, it was the sort of neighbourhood where a family could disappear into the ordinary business of living. School, work, weekends, the small rituals that make up Australian life. Guido and Alberta Valentich had come from Trieste, which is now northern Italy. They had 4 children. Frederick was the eldest, born on the 9th of June 1958. Then Ricky and the twins, Olivia and Lara. Frederick Valentich fell in love with flying when he was 12 years old. Not in the way that children sometimes love things and then grow out of them, but in the way that fixes itself to a person permanently, that becomes inseparable from who they are. He joined the Air Training Corps as a civilian volunteer. He spent his weekends at the airport. He talked about flying the way other young men talked about football. He applied to the Royal Australian Air Force, twice. He was rejected both times on educational grounds. He'd left school after Year 10, having struggled badly with mathematics and science. An RAAF assessor's report, written with the bluntness that military bureaucracies occasionally achieve, described his scores as indicative of someone suited only to unskilled work. It was a brutal assessment of a young man's future, and Frederick did not accept it. Instead, he pursued a career in civilian aviation. He obtained his student pilot licence in early 1977, his private pilot licence by September, and a Class 4 instrument rating that following year, which authorised him to fly at night, but only in clear visual conditions. He trained and flew out of Moorabbin Airport, just south of Melbourne. He paid for his flying hours by working at an army disposal store in Moonee Ponds, doing whatever shifts he could get to cover the cost of renting aircraft. His flying tutor was a squadron leader named Edward Barnes, a methodical, patient man who gave Frederick private weekend lessons in navigation and aircraft performance. Barnes would later describe his student as enthusiastic, polite, diligent, and he meant it. But enthusiasm, as it turned out, could only carry a person so far. Frederick was working towards his commercial pilot licence. The CPL required passing 5 theory subjects. In October 1977, he sat all 5, and he failed them all. In April 1978, he sat them again, and he failed them all again. In July 1978, he sat 3 of the 5 for a 3rd time. He failed all 3. Nobody knew. He told his tutor Barnes that he'd passed. He even went as far as bringing wine to Barnes's home to celebrate. He told his girlfriend, 16-year-old Rhonda Rushton, that things are going well. He told his family the same. These deceptions were quiet ones. Not dramatic lies, but the kind that require constant maintenance. The kind that leave a person walking an increasingly narrow ledge, above an increasingly long drop. He had other problems too. He'd twice deliberately flown into a cloud, a serious violation for a pilot without full instrument qualifications. Aviation authorities were considering prosecution. He had also strayed into controlled airspace near Sydney and received an official warning. He owed money to Southern Air Services for aircraft rental. He told the company that passengers from Sydney owed him the money. But there were no passengers. The Department of Transport's investigation, completed years later, used a phrase that has a particular kind of weight to it. Frederick Valentich, it noted, was rapidly running out of time. And yet, the people who knew him day to day, Rhonda, his brother Richard, the other young pilots at Moorabbin, did not describe a man in freefall. They described someone who was genuinely kind, genuinely eager, who rarely drank more than a couple of beers on a night out, who could be relied upon to show up and to try. Barnes, the tutor who had unknowingly been lied to repeatedly, would describe Frederick after the disappearance as one of the most polite and well-intentioned students he had ever taught. He used those words, knowing by then that he'd been lied to. 8 days before the disappearance, Frederick gave Rhonda a friendship ring. He had put a more expensive engagement ring on lay-by at a jeweller. He planned to propose at Christmas. He had plans for the Saturday evening after the flight. Moorabbin Airport sits about 18 kilometres south of Melbourne CBD, close enough to the bay that on a clear day you can see the water from the apron. On the 20th of October 1978, a Saturday, the afternoon was warm and still. At 5:23 in the afternoon, Frederick Valentich walked into the briefing office and filed a flight plan, Moorabbin to King Island and return. King Island sits in Bass Strait, roughly halfway between the Victorian coast and the northwestern tip of Tasmania, about 125 nautical miles from Moorabbin. The planned route took him southwest along the coast to Cape Otway, and then across the open water. He told the briefing officer he was going to pick up some passengers, 3 or 4 friends. He told his family he was going to pick up crayfish. The official investigation would later establish that both explanations were false. No passengers had made arrangements with him. No crayfish order had been placed. Southern Air Services, who owned the Cessna, did not permit crayfish transport in its aircraft regardless. He did take 4 life jackets. One more important detail at this point. King Island Airport is unattended and unlighted at night. After dark arrivals require the pilot to contact someone in advance to have the runway lights activated. Frederick did not make that call. He knew he would arrive after dark, and yet he made no arrangement to land. His girlfriend Rhonda, thinking about it years later, offered the simplest explanation. She believed he was simply building flight hours, that the trip to King Island was a pretext, a way to log the time legitimately without having to justify it to anyone. It's the least dramatic interpretation of the contradictions, and it may well be the correct one. At 6:10 in the evening, the Cessna, registration VHDSJ, a 4-seat high-wing 182L, blue and white, was refuelled to capacity. It had roughly 5 hours of flying time in the tanks. Frederick had been flying since before 4 in the afternoon on a separate local flight. He was current and signed out for the King Island trip. He departed Moorabbin at 6:19. Sunset was due at 6:43, 24 minutes away. Bass Strait has a reputation. It sits between the Australian mainland and Tasmania, a shallow and punishing body of water where weather can change without warning and currents run cold and fast. Dozens of aircraft have gone down in it over the decades, and not all of them have been found. It is not a place that gives things back lightly. But on this particular evening, the Bureau of Meteorology confirmed conditions that could hardly have been better. Clear skies in the Cape Otway area, visibility excellent, wind under 10 knots. Even the often treacherous sea was perfectly calm. What the weather briefing did not mention, because it was not relevant to a pilot's practical concerns, was the sky itself. To the west, Venus sat bright and low on the horizon, at or near its maximum brightness, burning with a light that pilots sometimes mistake for an aircraft. Alongside it, Mars, Mercury, and the star Antares formed a loose diamond shape in the fading sky. And overhead, active but invisible in the last light, the Orionid meteor stream was running. 10 to 15 meteors per hour expected through the night. It was Frederick Valentich's first night flight over open water. He crossed the coast at Cape Otway at precisely 7 o'clock, 41 minutes after departure, exactly as his flight plan had projected. He called in his position. Everything was on schedule. Ahead of him, Bass Strait, and behind him, the last lights of the mainland. Below him, nothing but dark water and the beginning of the stretch to King Island. Six minutes after passing Cape Otway, the radio came back to life. What Steve Roby heard in the next 6 minutes has never been fully explained. It begins simply enough. 7:06 and 14 seconds. Valentich's voice, measured and professional.
Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000?
Roby checks. Explains that there is nothing on his screens. Valentich responds 12 seconds later.
Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000.
Roby asks for a description. There's a pause, and then...
I cannot affirm. It is 4 bright, It seems to me like landing lights.
A conventional reading of these first exchanges. A young pilot, first night over water, spotting the brilliant diamond formation of Venus, Mars, Mercury and Antares on the western horizon, and wondering if he's looking at an approaching aircraft. It is a reasonable explanation. It does not require anything extraordinary, but the exchange does not end there. Not by a long way. 41 seconds later, Valentich's voice again.
Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. The aircraft has just passed over me, at least 1,000 feet above.
Roby asks to confirm. Is it a large aircraft?
Unknown, due to the speed it's travelling. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity?
Roby reaffirms that there are no known aircraft in the vicinity. 21 seconds pass, and then...
Melbourne, it's approaching now from due east towards me.
Another 31 seconds later.
It seems to me that he's playing some sort of game. He's flying over me 2-3 times at a time at speeds I could not identify.
Roby asks for Valentich's altitude, 4,500 feet. He asks again whether Valentich can identify the aircraft, and Valentich says no. Then, at 9 minutes and 28 seconds past 7.
Melbourne, Delta Sierra Juliet, it's not an aircraft. It is...
An open microphone. 2 seconds of silence. Roby again asks him to describe the aircraft.
As it's flying past, it's a long shape. It's before me right now, Melbourne.
It's important to note that the exact words here in this last sentence are disputed. Some versions of the transcript render this phrase as coming for me right now, not it is before me right now. A differentiation that paints a very different picture. Roby asks specifically about the size of the object. The answer, at 10 minutes and 19 seconds past 7, is the most specific Valentich has been. His voice remains calm as it would be if he was simply reading an instrument.
Melbourne, it seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me also. It's got a green light and sort of metallic light. It's all shiny on the outside.
Then, 29 seconds later.
Melbourne, it's just vanished.
A pause. Roby acknowledges. Valentich comes back.
Melbourne, would you know what kind of aircraft I've got? Is it a military aircraft?
Roby asks him to confirm. The aircraft has vanished?
It's, no, now approaching from the southwest.
It's at this point the character of the transmission changes.
The engine's rough idling. I've got it set at 23, 24, and the thing is coughing.
Roby asks for his intentions.
My intentions are to go to King Island. Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
7:12 p.m. Delta Sierra Juliet.
Melbourne.
The microphone stays open. For 17 seconds, the channel carries a sound that is not a voice and not silence. It has been described in many ways by the people who have listened to it. Metallic, scraping, staccato, mechanical. Dr. Richard Haynes, a former NASA research scientist who obtained a copy of the original tape and subjected it to a spectral analysis, identified 36 distinct bursts of sound, with fairly consistent start and stop pulses. He found no discernible pattern in time or frequency. He found no voice, no words, no Morse code. 17 seconds of this. And then nothing. Melbourne Flight Service unit called Delta Sierra Juliet again. And again. And again. Steve Roby kept calling for a long time after the silence. He would say later that he kept expecting an answer, that he simply could not accept that there wasn't going to be one. But there was no answer. At 7:33 p.m, when VHDSJ failed to arrive at King Island, a distress phase was declared. A search began. An RAAF Orion Maritime Patrol aircraft, 8 civilian planes, ocean-going vessels, more than 1,000 square miles of Bass Strait combed for 5 days. They found nothing. No wreckage, no life jackets, no body. There was an oil slick discovered the following morning, 18 miles north of King Island. But it was tested and confirmed as marine diesel. Nothing to do with VHDSJ. No Frederick Valentich. And the Cessna was gone. In the months and years that followed, people would advance many explanations for what happened in those 6 minutes over Bass Strait. Some of those explanations are rational, rigorous, and supported by real evidence. Some of them less so. But all of them have something to answer for. In part 2, The Unanswered, we will look at every one of them. The investigation and its limits, the ground witnesses, the photographs taken 20 minutes before Valentich's radio call on a cliff top at Cape Otway, and an account that researcher Bill Chalker carried for 17 years before he knew what to do with it. And we will ask what the silence at 7:12 p.m. on the 21st of October 1978 actually means. If you can't wait for part 2 until Friday, it's available right now on Struth Premium. Subscribing to our Patreon gives you access to all of our regular episodes 1 week early and ad-free. Additionally, you'll also receive a bonus episode of Struth each week. Either way, we'll see you in part 2.